Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to, well, really understanding the world around you. Today we're doing something fascinating. We're diving deep into the world of human networks.
Right, specifically using Matthew Jackson's book, Human Networks, as our guide. It's brilliant stuff.
It really is. And our mission today is basically to give you a completely new way of seeing things, how society works, how influence spreads, how opportunities pop up.
Exactly. It's about seeing the invisible architecture, the connections that shape so much, whether we notice them or not.
Once you get these ideas, it really changes how you look at everything. Social trends, careers.
Yeah, it's quite illuminating.
Okay, so to really get us started, let's use this amazing anecdote. It's almost unbelievable, actually, from the Chinese film and TV industry.
Oh, the lighting masters.
Yes, get this. Something like 80% of all the lighting technicians, the Deng Yi, as they call them, come from just one single tiny county.
Yanling County in Henan Province. It's wild, isn't it? Practically a monopoly.
How does that even happen?
Well, that's the perfect illustration of how these networks work. It wasn't planned. It just emerged. You go back maybe 30 years.
Okay.
A few farmers, really hardworking guys from Yanling, they head to Beijing looking for work. And they find an opportunity in lighting for film and TV.
Why lighting specifically?
Well, it was tough, physical work. The first generation doing it were retiring, and apparently locals weren't too keen on that kind of job, so there was an opening.
Okay, so these first few guys from Yanling, they become the nodes.
Exactly, the seeds of the network. And what do? They get established, they learn the ropes.
And they bring their friends and family from back home?
Precisely. People they trust, people from their community, they share the skills, they help each other out. It becomes this really tight-knit group.
More than just jobs, it's a whole support system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that trust, that community connection, that becomes their edge. Suddenly, it's really hard for anyone outside that Yanling network to break in.
Because they control everything.
Pretty much. Upstream, directors learn. You need good, reliable lighting. You call the Yanling guys, they trust them. So the orders flow to the network.
Okay, that makes sense. And downstream.
Think about making a movie. You might need, like, dozens of lighting guys, sometimes right away.
Yeah, on short notice.
Who can pull that off? The Yanling network can. They tap into their community, boom, they have the crew. Reliable, skilled people. It's incredibly efficient.
Wow. So it's not just about finding work, it's how that network itself became this powerhouse, a barrier.
A living example of network formation, growth, and dominance. And that's exactly the kind of thing Matthew Jackson digs into in Human Networks.
Right, he's the Stanford economist, a big name in this field.
A leading figure, yeah. This book builds on his earlier work, Economics and Social Networks, takes it even further.
So for our deep dive today, we'll break it down. We'll look at networks in three ways. First, the points, that's us, individuals.
Yeah. No.
Then the lines, how we connect, the different kinds of ties.
The relationship.
And finally, the networks themselves, the big patterns that emerge. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right, part one, points. How does being in a network actually shape us as individuals?
Well, the big idea here, maybe the most fundamental one, is that the nodes with the most connections, they tend to have the most influence.
Seems obvious, maybe?
It does, but the way it plays out is often quite subtle, kind of subconscious.
And the book kicks off with something called the friendship paradox. This is fascinating. It's that feeling you sometimes get.
That your friends are more popular than you are.
Yeah, like they know way more people. It turns out that's not just you being insecure. It's like statistically real.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It's a measurable social paradox. It's a bit of a head scratcher at first.
Okay, explain.
Imagine a school, 100 kids. You ask every single kid, how many friends do you have? Maybe the average is, say, 20.
Okay, standard.
But then you ask them a slightly different question. How many friends do your friends have? The average answer to that question will almost always be higher. Maybe 30?
Wait, how? If I'm friends with someone, they're friends with me. It should balance out, shouldn't it?
That's what feels logical, right? But it doesn't. The reason is what Jackson calls supernodes.
Supernodes.
Yeah, these are the people who have way, way more connections than average. The really popular people.
Okay.
Because they're connected to so many people, they're just statistically more likely to be one of your friends. So when you think about your friends' friends, who comes to mind?
Probably my most popular friends, yeah. The ones who know everyone.
Exactly. Those supernodes are overrepresented in your sample of friends' friends. You're not really averaging across all your friends, including the less connected ones. Your perception gets skewed by the outliers.
Wow. Okay, that makes a weird kind of sense. And this influences us.
Big time. And often unconsciously. The book gives this great example, um, party drinking.
Right. You go to a party, maybe you don't plan to drink, but then,
You see a few people drinking, maybe the loud ones, the center of attention types, and you think, oh, well, everyone's drinking.
yeah, happens all the time.
But if someone actually surveyed everyone at the party, they might find far fewer people are drinking than it seems.
So why does it feel like everyone is?
Because the people who are drinking are often those supernodes, the most active, the most visible people. Their behavior is just amplified. You end up following the perceived norm, which is actually just the behavior of a few influential nodes.
That's quite insightful, following the supernodes without realizing it.
And it applies elsewhere, too.
Ah,
There's this study about choosing the most beautiful face from 100 photos.
okay.
A lot of people didn't pick the face they personally liked best.
Why not?
Because the underlying question wasn't just, what do you like? It was subtly, which face will be chosen as the most beautiful? People started guessing what the popular consensus would be.
Ah, trying to predict what the supernodes in their social group would choose.
Exactly.
Huh.
Again, unconsciously aligning with the perceived influence of the most connected people. So these supernodes, they don't just have lots of friends, they actively shape our perceptions and even our choices.
So connections mean influence. But you said earlier, it's not always just about having the most connections, right?
Precisely. Having the most links isn't always the key. It depends on the type of link.
Which brings us to part 2, lines. The connections themselves.
Right. Jackson breaks these down into 4 types of centrality. Different ways connections create influence.
Okay, what's the first one?
Degree centrality.
Yeah.
This is the simplest one. It's just the raw number of connections you have.
Like celebrities, big social media influencers.
Exactly. Public figures, KOLs, big V's people with huge audiences. High degree centrality.
Lots of connections. Seems powerful.
It can be, for reach.
Yeah.
But like we said, quantity isn't everything. It doesn't always translate to deep influence or strategic power.
Which leads to the second type.
Eigenvector centrality. Now, this is where it gets interesting. It's not about how many people you know, but who you know. It's about the quality of your connections.
So knowing important people makes you more important.
In a network sense, yes. If your few connections are all highly influential, highly respected people, that boosts your influence way more than having hundreds of casual acquaintances. It's about who endorses you, essentially.
Okay, that makes sense. Quality over quantity.
And the best analogy for this? Google's search algorithm, PageRank.
Oh, yeah. How does that work?
Well, early search engines just used degree centrality, right? They counted keywords.
Which led to keyword stuffing. Terrible results.
Totally. Google changed the game. PageRank basically measures eigenvector centrality. It doesn't just count links to a page. It looks at the importance of the pages that are linking to it.
Ah, so if a really important, authoritative website links to your page...
Your page gets a higher ranking. It's an endorsement from a high-quality source. Importance flows through the links. It's about who vouches for you online.
That's brilliant. So personally, focus on connecting with valuable, influential people, not just collecting contacts.
That's the takeaway for building influence, yes. Boost your eigenvector centrality.
Okay, 2 down. What's next?
Closeness centrality. This one's about efficiency. How quickly can you reach everyone else in the network? How few steps does it take for information to spread from you?
Okay, like being close to everyone.
Yeah. Think about spreading news in those 10 remote villages we talked about before, modern tech.
Right. The chief might be important in his village.
But maybe not great at spreading news between villages. You'd want someone like a traveling matchmaker or a merchant.
Somebody who moves between the groups.
Exactly. Someone who knows people everywhere and can pass the message along quickly. High closeness centrality. Now, the book does note this is maybe less critical in today's hyper-connected world where information travels so fast anyway.
Okay, so degree, eigenvector, closeness. What's the last one?
Betweenness centrality. And this one is really powerful. This measures how much you act as a bridge, an indispensable link between people or groups that aren't otherwise connected.
So if I know person A and person B, but they don't know each other and they have to go through me to connect...
You have betweenness centrality in that specific relationship. And the more pairs of people or groups you uniquely connect like that, the higher your overall basis betweenness centrality.
Why is that so powerful?
Because you control the flow. You can integrate resources, ideas, opportunities from completely different circles. You become the crucial hub, the connector. It gives you immense leverage.
Like a broker of
A
connections.
very effective one. The classic example here is the Medici family in 15th century Florence.
Yes. The patrons of the Renaissance.
They weren't always the absolute richest or the most politically dominant in a direct sense. Their real strength, insanely high betweenness centrality.
Oh, so.
Think about it. A politician needs a painting. They go through a Medici to find an artist. A merchant needs a political favor. Medici. An artist needs funding from a merchant. Medici again.
Wow. They were the link between art, politics, commerce.
Exactly. They didn't own everything, but they controlled the pathways between everything important. They made themselves indispensable by bridging these different worlds. That's betweenness, centrality, and action. Huge influence.
Okay, so these four centralities, degree, eigenvector, closeness, betweenness, show different ways connections work. What happens when you put it all together, the whole network?
Right, that takes us to part 3, networks, the big picture patterns. And the most crucial pattern Jackson identifies is summed up in a simple phrase: centrality breeds centrality.
Centrality breeds centrality. It sounds like the rich get richer.
That's a very direct way to put it, yes. It's essentially the network version of the winner-takes-all effect. Popular people get more popular. Influential people gain more influence. Resources tend to flow to those who already have them.
Over time, a few nodes end up with most of the connections, most of the influence.
That's what the pattern suggests, yes. A small number control a disproportionate share.
But why? Is it just luck?
Not really. It's about how networks grow. When new connections form, they aren't random. We choose who to connect with.
And we tend to choose people who are already central.
Exactly. Think about walking into a new job or a party. Who do you try to meet?
Probably someone who seems important or popular or well-connected.
Right. Or starting a business. You seek out partners with good reputations, existing networks. We preferentially attach to nodes that already have high centrality in any of those 4 forms we discussed. It's a self-reinforcing cycle.
Centrality attracts more connections, which increases centrality.
And connections are about resource flow, information, money, opportunity. So resources naturally flow towards and accumulate at these central hubs.
Like that joke about the rich guy whose money always comes back to him.
Precisely. From a network view, it makes total sense. If you're a central node, money you spend circulates through the network and likely passes back through you eventually. The real estate tycoon buys pork, the seller buys property, it cycles back.
Okay, so if centrality breeds centrality, that sounds kind of depressing for newcomers, doesn't it? Like the game is rigged.
It might seem that way, but no. There's a crucial way to break in, a huge opportunity the book highlights. Finding and bridging structural holes.
Structural holes, what are those?
A structural hole is literally a gap, a missing link between 2 distinct groups or networks that could be connected but currently aren't.
A hole in the structure of the network.
Exactly. And bridging that hole can be incredibly powerful.
How powerful?
Okay, Jackson uses this wild thought experiment. Imagine just one person on Earth could contact aliens.
Whoa, okay. Like real aliens.
Real aliens. What happens to that person? Most people think they get super rich mediating trade.
Yeah, it makes sense. Sell alien tech.
But Jackson argues they'd likely become the single most powerful person on the planet.
More than just rich. Why?
Because humanity would need to understand these aliens, right? Diplomacy, threat assessment. This couldn't be left to one country. It's a global issue.
So all the world leaders, scientists, militaries.
They'd all converge on this one person. They'd form some kind of Earth alien liaison group, and that person is smack in the middle. Every message, every piece of information, every resource exchanged between humans and aliens must go through them.
They'd suddenly have the highest degree, eigenvector, closeness, A&D between hemness centrality imaginable.
Instantly. By bridging that massive structural hole between humanity and aliens, they become the indispensable node. Think about ancient priests or oracles claiming sole access to the gods, same principle, occupying the hole between the human and divine networks.
That's a mind-bending example, but okay, structural holes aren't usually that dramatic.
No, they exist everywhere, just on smaller scales.
Yeah.
Think about 2 departments in your company that don't talk to each other but should.
Yeah, sales and engineering, maybe.
If you can become the person who connects them, who translates between them, you're bridging a structural hole. That brings value, makes you important.
Or between different industries, different social groups.
Any place where there's a lack of connection, there's a potential structural hole. The bigger the gap you bridge, generally, the greater the potential value and influence you can gain. It's about spotting the missing links and becoming the bridge.
Okay, wow. So let's recap this deep dive into human networks. We started with points, us as individuals, and saw how we're shaped by connections, like through the friendship paradox and supernodes.
Right. Then we looked at the lines, the connections themselves, and those four centralities, degree, eigenvector, closeness, and betweenness, showing that how you're connected really matters.
And finally, the networks, the big patterns like centrality breeds centrality, but also the huge opportunities in finding and bridging structural holes.
So the key things for you to really take away today. First, just be aware that your view of the world, even your choices, are probably being subtly nudged by the supernodes in your life. Recognizing that give you more agency.
Second, quality over quantity in connections. Focus on building relationships that boost your eigenvector, or between signota centrality, those connections with influential people, or that bridge important gaps. That's often more strategic than just collecting contacts.
And third, yeah, the system might seem to favor existing players because centrality breeds centrality.
Mm.
But structural holes are the equalizer. They're the places where newcomers, innovators, anyone can step in, create a bridge, and generate massive value and influence. It's about looking for the gaps.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you. Now that you understand this idea of structural holes, these hidden gaps between networks, how might you look differently at your own world?
Yeah, think about your job, your industry, your community. Are there groups, people, or even just pieces of information that aren't connected but should be?
Could you be the one to build that bridge? And if you did, what new value, what new insights, what opportunities might emerge from that connection you create? Something to definitely think about.